Most people believe empathy is simply the ability to understand another person's emotions. That definition is accurate, but it is incomplete. For many people, empathy is not just something they do, it becomes the way they experience the world. They don't merely notice emotional tension in a room, they instinctively adjust to it. They don't simply hear another person's pain, they often carry pieces of it long after the conversation ends. In healthy relationships, this sensitivity can become a profound strength. It allows people to listen deeply, recognize needs that others overlook, and respond with genuine compassion. But the same quality that makes someone deeply compassionate can also leave them unusually vulnerable when life delivers prolonged suffering. There is a common assumption that painful experiences always make people either stronger or weaker. Human psychology is rarely that simple. Deep suffering often changes perception before it changes behavior. It alters what captures your attention, how quickly you detect emotional shifts, what you trust, and what your nervous system treats as safe or threatening. An empath who has never experienced profound betrayal often enters relationships with openness. They assume honesty until proven otherwise. They interpret mistakes generously. They believe most misunderstandings can be repaired through conversation and goodwill. After significant suffering, those same instincts may become more cautious. Not because compassion disappeared, because experience added another layer to perception. This transformation is rarely dramatic. It happens gradually, almost invisibly. One disappointment teaches vigilance. Another encourages hesitation. Repeated emotional injuries slowly reshape expectations until the mind begins scanning for patterns it once ignored. Psychologists sometimes describe this as adaptive learning. The brain is constantly updating its predictions based on experience. When certain situations repeatedly lead to pain, the mind naturally becomes more attentive to early warning signs. This process is not inherently unhealthy. In fact, it can be protective. The challenge is that protective adaptations can become overly broad. Someone who has been deceived several times may begin questioning trustworthy people. Someone who has experienced repeated rejection may expect rejection even where none exists. Someone who has lived through emotional instability may find calm relationships strangely unfamiliar at first. The nervous system does not distinguish perfectly between past and present. It works through patterns. That is why healing involves more than positive thinking. It often requires gradually teaching the mind and body that not every future experience will resemble the most painful parts of the past. Deep suffering also changes attention. Before hardship, many people focus naturally on possibility. After hardship, attention may shift toward risk. Neither perspective is completely wrong. Both reveal something important. Hope notices opportunity. Experience notices vulnerability. Maturity learns to hold both at the same time. This balance is difficult because suffering frequently creates a desire for certainty. The mind begins asking impossible questions. How can I guarantee this never happens again? How can I know exactly who to trust? How can I eliminate disappointment completely? These questions feel reasonable because they promise safety. The problem is that no human relationship comes with absolute certainty. Healthy growth is not about eliminating uncertainty. It is about learning to navigate uncertainty with wisdom rather than fear. One of the quietest changes suffering creates is increased sensitivity to inconsistency. An empath who has been deeply hurt often notices subtle differences between words and actions, much earlier than before. Someone says they value honesty, but repeatedly avoids difficult conversations. Someone promises reliability, yet regularly disappears when responsibility appears. Someone offers affection only when they need something. These patterns become more visible because experience has taught the observer that small inconsistencies sometimes precede larger disappointments. This heightened awareness can become a valuable form of discernment. It can also become exhausting if every inconsistency is interpreted as evidence of danger. Learning the difference between imperfection and genuine risk becomes one of the most important emotional skills after prolonged suffering. Another lasting change involves emotional boundaries. Many naturally empathetic people begin life believing compassion means absorbing everyone's else's emotional burdens. They become the listener, the helper, the peacemaker, the person who stays late, gives more, forgives quickly, and rarely asks for much in return. At first, this feels meaningful. Over time, without healthy limits, it can become overwhelming. Deep suffering often forces a difficult realization. Compassion does not require self-neglect. Supporting someone does not require carrying responsibilities that belong to them. Listening does not require solving every problem. Understanding another person's pain does not erase your own need for rest, honesty, or mutual care. These insights usually arrive through experience rather than theory. Pain has a way of exposing limits that kindness alone sometimes ignores. Another transformation occurs in the relationship with solitude. Before significant hardship, solitude may have felt unnecessary or even uncomfortable. After profound emotional pain, periods of quiet reflection often become essential. Not because the person has stopped loving others, because constant emotional input becomes more tiring than it once was. The nervous system seeks opportunities to recover. Reflection allows scattered experiences to become organized. Thoughts that felt chaotic begin finding structure. Emotions that seemed overwhelming gradually become understandable. This process takes time. There is no universal schedule for emotional recovery. Some changes occur within months. Others continue unfolding over years. Healing is rarely linear. Progress and setbacks often exist together. A difficult week does not erase months of growth. Neither does one good day mean every challenge has disappeared. The direction matters more than the speed. One surprising effect of suffering is that it often simplifies priorities. Experiences that once seemed urgent begin losing importance. External approval becomes less compelling. Performing for others becomes exhausting. Authenticity becomes increasingly valuable because maintaining false versions of yourself requires energy that suffering has taught you not to waste. This shift sometimes surprises people around you. They remember the version of you that always agreed, always accommodated, always remained available, regardless of personal cost. When healthier boundaries appear, some people celebrate your growth. Others resist it because the old version benefited them more. That reaction provides useful information. Healthy relationships usually adapt to healthy boundaries. Unhealthy dynamics often struggle with them. Another quiet transformation involves grief itself. Many people assume grief ends. More often, it changes. It becomes integrated into the story rather than dominating every chapter. The painful experiences remain part of who you are, but they gradually become one influence, among many, instead of the defining feature of your identity. That integration allows compassion to deepen without allowing pain to control every decision. The empath who emerges from profound suffering is rarely identical to the person who entered. It's not because kindness disappeared, not because hope became impossible, but because experience refined both. Compassion becomes paired with discernment. When generosity becomes balanced by boundaries, trust becomes something that grows through consistent experience instead of immediate, emotional connection. Sensitivity remains. Wisdom grows alongside it. The result is not a hardened heart. It is often a heart that has learned the difference between being open and being unprotected, between caring deeply and carrying everything, between understanding another person's struggles and surrendering responsibility for your own well-being. There comes a point in prolonged suffering when the greatest change is no longer what happened to you. It becomes the way your mind organizes reality afterward. The events themselves may belong to the past, but the brain continues asking a single question over and over again. What did I fail to see? That question is understandable. The mind naturally searches for patterns because patterns create a sense of predictability. If it can identify the warning signs that preceded the pain, perhaps it can prevent the next injury. This instinct is deeply human. It is one reason people replay conversations, revisit memories, and analyze decisions long after everyone else has moved on. The difficulty is that reflection can gradually become rumination. Reflection asks questions in order to learn. Rumination asks the same questions without ever arriving at new understanding. One creates wisdom. The other creates exhaustion. Learning to recognize that difference is one of the quiet turning points in recovery. A useful question is not, why did this happen to me? A more useful question is, what can I recognize sooner next time? That shift moves attention from the impossible task of changing the past toward the practical skill of navigating the future. Many empaths develop an extraordinary ability to understand other people's motives. They become experts at explaining behavior. They acted that way because they were afraid. They were under pressure. They had a difficult childhood. They never learned healthier ways to communicate. Sometimes those explanations are accurate. The danger appears when explanation quietly becomes permission. Understanding why someone behaves destructively is not the same as accepting destructive behavior. Compassion and accountability can exist together. You can understand someone's waist pain while also deciding their behavior is not something you are willing to live with. That distinction often feels uncomfortable to highly empathetic people because they naturally focus on context. Context matters. It simply isn't the entire picture. Another transformation brought by suffering is a different relationship with certainty. Before hardship, certainty often feels comforting. After hardship, many people realize certainty was partly an illusion. Carefully made plans can change. Trusted people can disappoint. Unexpected opportunities can appear without warning. Life becomes less predictable than it once seemed. At first, this realization can increase anxiety. Eventually, it can produce resilience. Instead of depending on certainty, you begin depending on adaptability. Adaptability is different from constantly changing your mind. It is the confidence that whatever happens, you can pause, think, learn, and respond with intention. That confidence cannot be borrowed. It develops through experience. Every challenge survived becomes evidence that future challenges can also be navigated. Not perfectly, but thoughtfully. Another subtle change involves silence. Before deep suffering, silence sometimes feels empty. Afterward, silence often becomes informative. You notice what people avoid discussing. You notice what remains unsaid after difficult questions. You notice who changes the subject whenever responsibility appears. Communication is shaped as much by omission as by expression. This doesn't mean assuming hidden motives everywhere. It means paying attention to the entire conversation instead of only the spoken words. Trust grows through consistency between words, actions, and patterns over time. One moment rarely tells the whole story. Repeated moments usually do. This is why patience becomes such a valuable skill. Time reveals character in ways that first impressions cannot. Charm can last an evening. Consistency lasts through seasons. Many emotionally intelligent people eventually realize they were evaluating potential, rather than reality. They saw who someone could become. They invested in possibilities. They hoped effort, encouragement, or understanding would eventually transform the relationship. Hope is valuable. Expectation without evidence is risky. People deserve the opportunity to grow. They also deserve the responsibility of choosing that growth themselves. You cannot carry another person's willingness to change. No amount of empathy can substitute for another person's decisions. This realization often feels heartbreaking because it challenges one of the deepest instincts many caring people possess. The instinct to rescue. Rescuing feels compassionate in the beginning. Over time, it can unintentionally prevent both people from growing. One person avoids responsibility. The other becomes increasingly exhausted. Healthy support looks different. It encourages. It listens. It helps where appropriate. But it also leaves room for personal responsibility. Another lasting effect of suffering is an increased appreciation for emotional steadiness. Excitement is enjoyable. Intensity can be meaningful. But stability becomes deeply attractive. Relationships where people communicate honestly, repair misunderstandings respectfully, and maintain predictable behavior begin to feel less ordinary and more precious. Many people mistake calm for boredom because they became accustomed to emotional highs and lows. The nervous system sometimes confuses familiarity with health. Recovery often involves teaching yourself that peace is not the absence of connection. Peace is a form of safety. Safety allows genuine intimacy to develop. Without safety, people spend too much energy protecting themselves to become fully known. Another change appears in decision-making. Before difficult experiences, choices may have been driven primarily by emotion. Afterward, emotion remains important, but observation gains greater influence. Instead of asking only, "How do I feel about this person?" you begin asking, "What have they consistently shown?" Feelings provide information. Patterns provide evidence. Both deserve attention. Neither should completely replace the other. Balance produces better judgment than relying exclusively on instinct or analysis. Deep suffering also alters your relationship with time. Immediate gratification loses some of its appeal. Long-term peace becomes more valuable than short-term excitement. Quick reassurance becomes less satisfying than durable trust. The ability to wait becomes an advantage. Waiting creates opportunities for truth to emerge naturally. Pressure often conceals reality. Time frequently reveals it. This patience extends inward as well. Healing rarely responds well to impossible deadlines. Many people become frustrated because they believe they should already feel different. Growth doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it appears in ordinary moments. You notice you recover from disappointment more quickly than before. You recognize an unhealthy pattern earlier than you once would have. You decline a request without overwhelming guilt. You trust your judgment in situations where you previously ignored it. These quiet changes are easy to overlook because they don't resemble dramatic breakthroughs. yet they often represent the deepest kind of transformation. The person you are becoming is shaped less by a single moment of insight and more by hundreds of small decisions repeated consistently over time. Choosing rest instead of constant overextension. Choosing honesty instead of people-pleasing. Choosing discernment instead of blind optimism. Choosing compassion without abandoning self-respect. These choices gradually create a different internal landscape, not one defined by fear, not one defined by suspicion, but one defined by awareness. Awareness notices emotions without being ruled by them. Awareness welcomes kindness without abandoning caution. Awareness remains open to connection while recognizing that trust grows through experience, rather than assumption. Perhaps the most lasting transformation is this. Suffering often teaches that your greatest source of stability cannot come entirely from circumstances or from other people. Relationships matter deeply, but they cannot carry the full weight of your emotional foundation. That foundation grows stronger as you develop self-understanding, healthy boundaries, meaningful purpose, and the confidence that you can face uncertainty without losing yourself. An empath who has traveled through profound suffering may still feel deeply, still care deeply, and still respond with compassion. The difference is that compassion is now accompanied by discernment, generosity by wisdom, openness by healthy limits, and hope by a clearer understanding that protecting your own well-being is not the opposite of kindness. In many cases, it is what allows kindness to remain sustainable instead of becoming another path toward exhaustion. Something else changes after deep suffering that is difficult to explain until you're lived through it. You stop listening only to what people say, and you begin paying closer attention to how you feel after interacting with them. This isn't about treating every uncomfortable feeling as proof that someone is harmful. It's about recognizing that your emotional state can sometimes provide useful information when combined with observation and evidence. There are conversations that leave you feeling lighter, even when difficult topics were discussed. Those conversations often contain honesty, mutual respect, curiosity, and a willingness to understand. Then there are conversations that leave you feeling unusually confused, guilty, drained, or uncertain about things you previously understood clearly. That feeling alone doesn't prove manipulation or bad intent, but it is worth slowing down and asking why. Instead of immediately blaming yourself or the other person, begin asking better questions. What actually happened during that interaction? What facts do I know? What assumptions am I making? Did we both take responsibility for our part, or did all responsibility seem to flow in one direction? Questions like these interrupt automatic reactions. They move you from emotional overwhelm toward thoughtful evaluation. Deep suffering often teaches that awareness is more valuable than certainty. Many people chase certainty because they believe it guarantees safety, but life rarely offers complete certainty. Awareness, however, remains available in every situation. You can notice patterns. You can observe behavior over time. You can recognize when your own emotions are becoming intense enough that clear thinking becomes more difficult. This awareness also applies inward. One of the greatest gifts suffering can eventually provide is greater self-knowledge. You begin recognizing your own tendencies before they become problems. Perhaps you notice that loneliness makes you ignore red flags you would otherwise recognize. Perhaps guilt makes you overcommit until exhaustion becomes unavoidable. Perhaps fear of conflict causes you to remain silent when honesty would serve everyone better. Recognizing these tendencies isn't an invitation to criticize yourself. It's an invitation to understand yourself. Self-understanding creates options. Without it, old patterns often repeat themselves automatically. Many empaths spend years believing that being needed is the same as being valued. At first glance, those ideas appear similar. They are profoundly different. Being needed often depends upon what you provide. Being valued depends upon who you are. If every relationship requires you to constantly solve problems, rescue others, absorb emotional burdens, and neglect your own needs in order to feel appreciated, eventually exhaustion replaces connection. Healthy relationships include giving. They also include receiving. Support flows in both directions. Care becomes mutual instead of one-sided. Another quiet lesson suffering teaches is the importance of emotional pacing. Strong connections do not require immediate vulnerability. Trust develops through repeated experiences of honesty, respect, and reliability. There is no prize for revealing your deepest wounds before someone has demonstrated the capacity to handle them with care. Many people confuse emotional intensity with emotional intimacy. Intensity can develop within hours. Intimacy usually develops through consistency over time. Someone may share deeply personal stories during the first conversation. That may create the feeling of closeness. Actual trust requires something more durable. It requires seeing how someone behaves when expectations change, when misunderstandings arise, when disappointment occurs, when saying no becomes necessary. Character often becomes clearest during ordinary moments, rather than dramatic ones. Pay attention to how people respond to small frustrations, how they treat service workers, how they speak about people who are not present, whether they apologize sincerely after making mistakes, whether they follow through on commitments without constant reminders. These details may appear insignificant individually. Together they create a pattern. Patterns deserve attention because they are more reliable than isolated impressions. Deep suffering also reshapes ambition. Many people discover that they no longer want to impress everyone. They want peace. They want meaningful work. They want relationships where honesty does not require fear. They want environments where they can relax instead of constantly scanning for hidden tension. This shift sometimes surprises people who knew you before. They may wonder why you seem quieter, less interested in unnecessary competition, more selective about where you invest your energy. From the outside, this can appear like withdrawal. Often it is discernment. Energy becomes something you manage deliberately because experience has shown how difficult it can be to restore once it has been depleted. Another transformation involves forgiveness. Forgiveness is frequently misunderstood as forgetting, excusing, or immediately restoring trust. Those are separate decisions. Forgiveness is about releasing the desire to remain emotionally chained to the injury. Trust is rebuilt through consistent behavior over time. Reconciliation depends upon both people. These distinctions matter because many compassionate people feel guilty for maintaining healthy distance after being hurt. Distance is not always bitterness. Sometimes it is wisdom. You can genuinely wish someone well while recognizing that closeness is no longer appropriate. Those ideas can coexist. Another lesson arrives unexpectedly. Not everyone will understand the person you become after profound suffering. Some people only knew the version of you that avoided conflict, the version that rarely declined requests, the version that apologized even when unnecessary. When healthier boundaries appear, they may interpret your growth as rejection. Others, however, will recognize something different. They will see increased calm, greater clarity, more thoughtful decisions. They will notice that you still care deeply, but you no longer abandon yourself in the process. That balance is difficult to develop. It usually grows through repeated experience rather than sudden realization. Every difficult season contributes another piece. Every healthy relationship reinforces another truth. Every honest conversation strengthens confidence a little more. Eventually, you begin noticing something remarkable. The suffering that once seemed only destructive has also become educational. Not because pain itself is desirable. Pain is painful. Loss is loss. Betrayal remains betrayal. The value comes from what careful reflection allows you to build afterward. You become slower to judge, quicker to listen, more willing to admit uncertainty, more capable of recognizing genuine kindness because you have also experienced its absence. Compassion matures. It becomes less impulsive and more sustainable. You stop measuring love by sacrifice alone. You begin measuring it by respect, consistency, honesty, and mutual care. Perhaps the deepest transformation is that your relationship with yourself begins to change. Instead of constantly asking whether everyone else approves of your decisions, you begin asking whether your decisions align with your values. Instead of trying to avoid every uncomfortable emotion, you learn that discomfort sometimes accompanies healthy choices. Saying no may feel uncomfortable. Speaking honestly may feel uncomfortable. Leaving an unhealthy situation may feel uncomfortable. Discomfort alone is no longer treated as evidence that you're making the wrong decision. It becomes one piece of information among many. This creates a quieter kind of confidence. Not loud, not performative, not dependent upon convincing everyone around you. Simply steady. Steady enough to remain kind without becoming naive. Steady enough to remain hopeful without ignoring reality. Steady enough to extend compassion while also protecting your own well-being. And over time, people who meet you may notice that you still possess the warmth that has always defined you. What they may not immediately recognize is the structure beneath that warmth. A structure built through difficult experiences, careful reflection, healthier boundaries, greater self-awareness, and the understanding that lasting compassion is strongest when it is supported by wisdom as well as empathy.